Thank you all, and we'll now open it up to all of you. Please identify yourself when you speak so that we can begin to know who is in the room and anyone who would like to begin. And also speak reasonably slowly so that the translators who do not have your texts will be able to do that.
Hello. My name is Sanchez. I work in the Ecuadorian Embassy in Washington. And thank you very much. It has been really interesting to
She can't hear.
Okay, so once again, just in case you didn't hear me, my name is Belén Sanchez. I work in the Ecuadorian Embassy in Washington. Thank you very much for all your presentations. It has been really interesting. And many issues have been raised, and I would like to ask you one in particularly, because you have mentioned, Steve, if I'm not wrong, that there has been some that we have been running in the Ecuadorian government some initiatives that are trying to bring our diasporas back, and many policies have been designed in that sense. However, I would like to know your opinion, and maybe if you have some insights about what can be done also in order to involve diasporas in foreign policies, meaning in the places where they are staying right now. So in US right now, we have a huge discussion about the immigration reform and so on. So I don't know, what are your clues, insights, and opinions about that? What can be done in order to involve them more?
I guess that's directly to me, though I would love some help from my fellow panelists and from the audience. Well, I guess I would say first, it's important not to underestimate the influence that these people and your office is already having. I don't think we would be having the conversations about immigration reform, since that was the example you mentioned, if it weren't for the insistence by residents who are undocumented in this country, including hundreds of thousands of Ecuadorianos, that they have the rights of membership and residency, and the ability to travel back to see family members, the ability to bring family members here, the ability to access welfare resources and other social protections. So those are not arguments that come from the top, so to speak. Those are arguments that really have emanated from everyday people. And those conversations, of course, grew in the aftermath of 2001 and perhaps peaked, at least in terms of protest movements in 2006, but are still obviously very much with us today. And the policy discussions we're having in 2012, 2013 are a result of those kinds of energies. What more can be done? Well, you know, I don't know, but I will say, or I don't have a quick and easy answer for you. I think some of it does have to do with the sort of second topic that I wasn't able to talk about, but that Ned referenced. And that is, I think, that more can be done by all of us in engaging with questions that are basically history questions. And when I mentioned Ned, I was thinking about his observation about truth and reconciliation commissions. All politics starts with a story, I think, just like all nationalisms, all nations is about a story of who people are. And if that's true, then I think social movements also have something to do with storytelling, that people have to describe themselves and their proximity to others, where things came from and where they're going. And it seems to me that the Ecuadorian government's representatives in the United States, Ecuadorians in the United States, living in the United States, and all of us can do more in making arguments about the future of immigrants in this country to better explain the long past of people in this country, the many contributions of people in this country, the complexity of these people in this country, so that they're not stereotyped and relegated as, you know, a kind of simple story, and that's one place, one of many places probably, where people in government, people in the academy, people in the media, people in many kind of areas of life can perhaps put more focus, and that may pay off in political ways if it's done right.
to continue the conversation, I would love to hear Professor Jhon Anton's response in terms of including the stories of Afro-descended peoples in Ecuador in the national history. I mean, what would it be possible to imagine some sort of institutionalization of some equivalent to the Truth and Reconciliation model, or would there be other ways of being able to imagine how these untold stories of the contribution to the nation could be brought to a plurinational consciousness?
Bueno, no sé, ¿se prende? ¿Está encendido? Ok. Sobre las contribuciones de los afrodescendientes al Estado Nacional. Bueno, lo primero es que hay una gran invisibilidad de la contribución de los esclavos a la estructuración de los estados nacionales en la América Latina. No tenemos presente en los textos de historia, en los textos de enseñanza escolar, que Haití fue una de las primeras naciones negras libres, creada por esos esclavos, que ayudó a la construcción de las independencias nacionales con el general Simón Bolívar y también con el general San Martín. Tampoco se tiene una claridad sobre las contribuciones de la esclavitud como forma de acumulación originaria del capitalismo, esta primera revolución humana antes que la revolución industrial que permitió que el capitalismo europeo se fortaleciera y se construyera la modernidad. En el caso del Ecuador, los episodios de construcción, de aportes de los esclavos o de los afrodescendientes a la construcción del Estado Nacional son muchísimos y están presentes en cada uno de los episodios de transformación económica, política y social del país. Las contribuciones son enormes desde la literatura, desde, desde la política, desde las luchas en las distintas revoluciones como la revolución del general Eloy Alfaro, la modernización del país con la construcción del ferrocarril, los trabajos de los obreros afrodescendientes en las plantaciones de cacao, de banano en la costa ecuatoriana, en fin, son muchísimas las contribuciones. Pero ¿qué ha sucedido? Y es que la ideología del mestizaje en la construcción del Estado Nacional ha hecho invisibilizar estos grandes aportes. Por eso nosotros planteamos una necesidad de la descolonización de estas ideologías que invisibilizan como una manera para construir el Estado plurinacional. Ahora bien, en el año 2009 ocurrió algo muy importante en el gobierno del presidente Rafael Correa. No quiere decir con esto de que yo esté haciendo un apoyo a Rafael Correa, no, lo observo como un académico de cosas que se hacen. El presidente firmó el decreto 60 para las acciones afirmativas, pero en este decreto 60 habían 2 artículos más referidos a la visibilidad del aporte de los afrodescendientes, indígenas y montuyos a la construcción del Estado Nacional. Se proponían cambios a los nombres de los museos, de las avenidas, de las calles, de los monumentos. Se establecía la necesidad de un año contra el racismo y se establecía la necesidad de celebrar un día especial sobre la afrodescendencia. Son cambios importantes, son políticas importantes para poner de presente el aporte de los afrodescendientes a la construcción del Estado Nacional. Sin embargo, estas narrativas todavía no han sido posibles de hacer. Es decir, estos decretos no se han podido cumplir. ¿Y por qué no se ha podido cumplir? Por aquello que planteaba en mi alocución, es decir, la colonialidad del poder y el prejuicio racial burocrático no permiten que las políticas públicas que establece este gobierno de la Revolución Ciudadana puedan convertirse. Ojalá algún día podamos tener esta visibilización del aporte de los afrodescendientes a la construcción del Estado Nacional con la construcción de un museo de la historia de la diáspora africana en el Ecuador. Hemos venido insistiendo en construir este museo, sabemos dónde lo podemos hacer, sabemos cómo lo podemos hacer, pero también mi mamá siempre ha dicho que hay que ser pacientes y esperar, porque algún día las cosas van a llegar. Muchas gracias.
Ojalá.
Hola, soy la profesora Dixa Ramírez y enseño literatura latina y caribeña. Y mi pregunta es para el profesor Sánchez. Me interesa saber el porqué a qué se debe esa diferencia entre cómo la gente se autodefine desde el 2001 al 2010. Porque, por ejemplo, vi una gran diferencia entre la gente que se define como blanco, que no se puede explicar solamente con los nacimientos. Y ahora usted acaba de mencionar ese proyecto del presidente en el 2009 y me pregunto si hizo un cambio, ese es el porqué de ese cambio. No sé, porque para mí es interesantísimo cómo cambió ese.
Bien, los nombres son muy importantes desde el punto de vista simbólico. Es decir, el significado y el significante de que habla Ferdinand de Saussure, el gran autor de la sociolingüística. Las autodenominaciones constituyen momentos epistémicos, momentos de nuevas visiones, de nuevas interpretaciones teóricas e interpretaciones de la realidad. Los nombres están asociados también con posiciones en la estructura social. Por eso, en el caso del Ecuador, la autodenominación de negros, de indígenas, de indios versus indígenas, de negros versus afrodescendientes, son importantes. Cuando referimos a los conceptos de negros, en el caso latinoamericano, en el caso ecuatoriano, estamos hablando de la imposición colonial, es decir, cómo la modernidad europea construye el sujeto africano en negro, cómo la modernidad europea construye el sujeto africano en esclavo. Y esto le quita la condición de ser humano y despersonalización, es decir, lo deshumaniza, lo racializa, convierte al sujeto en negro. Y esto es muy importante, porque en términos de Frantz Fanon, la persona que le han convertido en negro termina entendiendo que es negro y por lo tanto que es inferior y acepta la realidad de inferioridad y de explotación. Ahora nosotros planteamos un cambio, una ruptura epistemológica y pasar de negro a afrodescendiente. Esto es un concepto ontológico pero muy importante porque es una nueva visión de la ciudadanía, es una nueva visión de la construcción de la humanidad, es una nueva construcción incluso de la identidad de la persona y de la identidad colectiva en el cual se hace parte la persona. Ahora bien, ¿cómo han repercutido estos cambios en la transformación del Ecuador? Por ejemplo, en los censos. En el censo del 2001, por primera vez, se han constituido estas categorías de afrodescendiente, de blanco, de mestizo, de indígenas. Pero son categorías estratégicas para entender cómo están las desigualdades sociales en nuestro país. Y en la medida en que se comprenden estas desigualdades sociales, se pueden impulsar políticas públicas que permitan la equidad y la igualdad de todos los ciudadanos. De alguna forma, creemos que las categorías en este momento son supremamente importantes porque nos permiten precisar exactamente dónde está el problema en la sociedad ecuatoriana. ¿No hay más?
Other questions, comments?
Professor Weber, you show us a very interesting chart about income inequality, and I noticed that despite sharing some of factors of exclusion among Asians or Black or Latinos, they have different speed of, sort of like catching up. Will you elaborate more in which factors will affect more. I noticed, for example, that the Latino went from 3.2 and to 10%, and Black haven't reached that point yet. I mean, what are those factors that, being all excluded, makes the difference a pattern of exclusion among all those different minority groups?
That's a very good question, and it's going to involve an answer that I probably don't have time to give, but let me see if I can suggest some differences. Those figures obscure as much as they tell. So, for example, within the Black community, there's enormous disparities, and those disparities have increased over time. So, for example, in some of my other work, I break down the income and poverty and unemployment statistics by whether you're a dark-skinned Black person or whether you're a light-skinned Black person. And it's not just race that predicts your outcomes, it's also skin color to a large extent. We have the same history here of colorism as in other parts of the world. And it's something that often here we haven't recognized it. We've talked about sort of formal equality and nothing more. We've talked about, well, unless you can show in a court of law a bigot, really we have no remedy, right? So we have no way of talking about, recognizing, having a consciousness about those skin color disparities within the Black community. What explains the differences between Blacks and Latinos and Asians? I think that our particular history and the history of the 1970s and deindustrialization hurt the worst off Blacks more than it hurt other groups. Even with that said, though, there's enormous disparities within Latinos and Asians themselves. So if I were to show you charts that break down Asians by whether they are Laotian, Hmong, subcontinental Indian, or Japanese, you're going to see as wide differences within sub-ethnicities and sub-nationalities as you are between racial groups. Same thing for Latinos. Okay, Black Puerto Ricans, dark-skinned Mexicans, and Chicanos have very different outcomes than Cubans, than Californian Mexicans that have been here for several generations. So, I think Professor Pitti is absolutely right. We need to recover history in some of these discussions. Something very dangerous that has happened in the United States that I was reminded of by another question is these groups have been pitted against one another. So if you look at local rural communities within the United States, Blacks and Latinos are vying for the same jobs, and low-income Blacks are very against increasing inclusion of Latinos because it's going to take their jobs. And so all of this involves a history, it involves the policy context, and one thing that I've been struck by just sitting here listening to this, I've been nothing short of amazed and bowled over, really, by the fact that your government has taken such proactive steps towards recognition, right? Recognition, bringing people into not just having a voice, but to being their experiences, their history, being part of the Constitution. And I'm having trouble imagining what that looks like in the United States. We don't even have a consciousness among the people, among a segment of the people, not to say nothing of the government actually taking steps towards recognition and unity. So I would like to hear, as the day goes on, more about that. I feel like we have a tremendous amount to learn from the experience of Ecuador. And it's made me more optimistic that, hey, a country out there has done this. They've embodied this within their constitution. Thank you for your question.
We have a long day, and I think most of us will be here for the whole day, so I think we'll hold and have our coffee breaks and get people to have some more informal conversation. We'll reassemble at noon. You have a half hour to have coffee and for the next panel. Thank you. And thank you.